Why is this the throne of Satan and where Satan lives? I think the understanding of the church fathers went kind of like this. The Greek pantheon were all demons, and Pergamon at the crest of the hill there on the Acropolis was a monumental altar to Zeus. So it was a center of Zeus worship. Zeus, as the head demon, would therefore be symbolic of Satan. So I grew up, in the era of Indiana Jones, right? And in those movies, the theme is that the Nazis are running all around the world trying to collect like weird occultic stuff to get magic powers to win the war. And you think like, this is totally bullcrap. This isn't. And then you go to Pergamon and you're like, well, where's the altar? And you're like, oh, it's in Berlin. Why is it in Berlin? Oh, Hitler got it. Okay. So they really did go around and grab weird occultic stuff and haul it back, to Germany for whatever reason.
Welcome to this episode of the Land in the Bible podcast. Today we're continuing a series on Revelation, and today we're going to be talking about Pergamon. Jamison is here with me today, and this is a really great episode, I think, because you and I went here, and when we went to Ephesus and we drove around Turkey for a bit and we popped in, we're like, let's go check out Pergamon. This is a pretty cool spot. And we got there and we were kind of blown away by what we saw. So I'm excited to have you go through this and kind of unpack it, because we're going to be doing it from the perspective of the historical kind of understanding of this this letter. So tell me a little bit about what we're going to be getting into and kind of set the stage for our audience.
Yeah, well, if just to remember sort of what happened when the first time we went, we'd been at Ephesus to film, and then we had like a day to kill, basically. Like we had a day before we were kind of flying back to Greece. And so it was like, what are we going to do? And I'm just like thumbing through the Bible, looking at places, that were close enough to drive to, basically, like what's close around here that's in the Bible. And you get to Pergamon and it says throne of Satan. And I was like, whoa, that's where it's like,
let's go there.
Let's go there. It's the throne of Satan. What's up with that, So that was pretty much the motive to go there that day. If I remember correctly, it was like, because I lived in Israel for a long time and I knew the sites there really well, and, had been blessed to, get to study with some pretty spectacular professor, scholar types, but I had not gotten to study the same level of sites over here. And so, I'd read that before, but I hadn't thought about it, and so, I don't know, so just kind of reading through Revelations 1 and 2 to see what was close by us. And you get to that one, you're like, well, that's interesting. What was going on there? What's up with that spot? And so we basically went there to kind of figure it out. I've been back several times. Pergamon is a jaw dropper. It's a big wow. It's like I live in Athens, and the Acropolis of Athens is, it's iconic, right? People that don't know anything about really history and culture, like, you see the picture of the Acropolis and it's Athens. What do they call it in movies, like a fixing shot or whatever, where it's like shows the London eye. So, oh, we're in London, or the Eiffel Tower. So, okay, we're back in Paris now or whatever. The Acropolis is like that. You see it, you're like, oh, we're in Greece. Okay, Athens, let's go. When I lived here for bumping 3 years now, so I see the Acropolis pretty often these days. Every city in the Greek world, virtually every city, there was an exception or two, I suppose, but had a quote unquote Acropolis, which is like the most prominent hill, because this is a really hilly part of the world, where the altar to the main god or goddess that city worshiped, so the patron god, was located. And as you drive up to Pergamon, which is modern day Bergama, which is obviously clearly from the same route, when you drive up to Pergamon, what you see is that it's significantly taller than the Acropolis, here in Athens. It's a tall mountain. It's at least 1,000 feet above the surroundings, at least. Maybe, I'm sure it's more than that. It seems like more than that when you're up there. Just so you'll know, the city included that upper city, where all that stuff was. But then there was also a lower city wrapped around the base of the hill, just like you have here in Athens. But, in modern day, you can take a cable car up there, or you can drive up, kind of around the backside of the mountain. But it's a long way up there. It's very, very impressive. And when you think what it would have looked like a couple of thousand years ago in the height of its glory, when the whole top of that mountain was covered in marble, white, shiny temples and palaces, altars and theaters and the whole, and you approach it coming up that valley. So you'd have been walking straight at it, for miles, really. I am sure it was spectacularly impressive because it's impressive in ruin. So, okay. So first off, it was pretty awesome. When the Romans first came in, it was the capital of Asia. So of the surrounding areas, it was a wealthy, successful city. But the Bible says some weird stuff about Pergamon. So let's just kind of maybe run through what the Bible says and try to figure out, why did Jesus call it the throne of Satan? And this is what Jesus says. Write to the angel of the church of Pergamon. As we said, that's the lead pastor. The one who has the sharp, double-edged sword says. Jesus constantly refers to things that are local knowledge. The seat of Roman government, at least at one point, was in Pergamon for the region. And the Roman proconsul there would have had the power of life and death. The capacity to pass death sentences, as symbolized by the fact that he has the sword. The Bible uses in other passages, it says that the government has the sword. And what Jesus is saying by saying that I have the double-edged sword is he saying that he has the ultimate power over life and death, the ultimate authority, not these proconsuls or governors in Pergamon. And he says, I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. And you're holding on to my name and did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, something's way servant, who was killed among you where Satan lives. What on earth is going on here? Why is this the throne of Satan and where Satan lives? And there's a plethora of reasons why you might say that. I think the understanding of the church fathers went kind of like this. The Greek pantheon were all demons. So Athena's a demon, Dionysus is a demon, Pan's a demon, Hephaestus, Mars, all of them, right? And since Zeus is the head of that, then Zeus is symbolic of Satan. I think this is sort of, I forget which church father says that, but that he kind of makes that argument. And Pergamum, the later there was an emperor, a temple of Trajan built above this, but the sort of the big wow, the center of attention, the main thing your eye was drawn to at the crest of the hill there on the Acropolis was a monumental scale, quote unquote, altar to Zeus. So it was the center of Zeus worship. So if you accept that the pantheon was demonic and that Zeus as the head demon would therefore be symbolic of Satan, that is certainly one theory as to why Jesus would have said that. I don't want to go maybe too far down the road of the weird stuff, but let's go at least a little bit down the road of the weird stuff. I think you can't avoid it, and so maybe we have to. Your Bible says very clearly, Paul says this, that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, okay? Paul also refers to the quote-unquote God of this age, okay, that there is a spiritual force that is present in this age that has power. John, if you read the rest of the book of Revelation, talks about similar things, the dragon that tries to consume Jesus at his birth and things like that. And if you go back into the Old Testament to try to understand the worldview of John, who's writing, who would have definitely had a first century Jewish worldview, that's where he grew up, that's where he was raised. If you did kind of dig into his worldview, he would have been hyper knowledgeable of a whole series of texts. The book of Daniel, for instance, talks about how Daniel prayed and God sent an angel with the answer to his prayer. And when the angel finally gets to Daniel, he says, yeah, God sent me 21 days ago, but the prince of Persia, which is clearly not a human, he's talking about a spiritual force, held me up, because a human can't hold up an angel, for 21 days. And then God sent Michael, and Michael fought him and got me out. And so now I came here to tell you. Daniel also references the quote-unquote prince of Greece in the context of a prince of Persia and a prince of Greece. I think that's probably also a spiritual being, although some maybe argue it's Alexander, but I think it's spiritual. You've got incidences like when Ahab dies, and the prophet tells us that, God held a council and said, I'm ready for Ahab to die. Anybody got any ideas how we get this done? And it says the spirit said, I can go as a deceptive spirit into the prophets and tell Ahab to attack this city that he can die. And God says, that's a great idea. Go do that. I guess all that's just to say is that there is a spiritual realm that is more complex than we give it credit for, and that is real. I wasn't maybe quite as mystical about this stuff until I went to Pergamon and started processing through what does Jesus mean by this. And then also living here in Greece, I've been to Delphi several times, and Delphi was the center of the Greek religion. And the main thing that happened there is you had a priestess called a Pythia, from the word Python, who teams would inhale gases that came out of a cave. But what they believed was that when Gaia, the ancient earth mother, made the earth, that she gave birth to a giant magical snake that lived in the mountain there, Mount Parnassus, and that Apollo eventually killed that snake, and the emanations from his body came up through the mountain, and therefore you could tell the future. And so people would go ask the priest to ask the Pythia questions. Should I marry this girl, buy this land, go to war? But also emperors, Alexander, should I invade Persia? Croesus of the Lydians, should I attack the Persians? The Athenians, the same question. And whole nations turned on the answers that they were given. It's hard to write it all off to just being fake. There are things that are said there. The most famous one that's really interesting, there's several. The king of Lydia, which is Central Asia. Okay, so this is going back, 500 years before Paul, but or before Jesus and John, but just to sort of let you understand what was going on, he decides, well, there's all these oracles running around the ancient world, and I want to figure out which one's telling me the truth. And so he sent messengers to all these different oracles and different temples around the Greek, broader Greek world. And he says, he told all of these messengers that on a certain day, go into the oracle and say, what is my master eating for dinner today? And then on that day, he ate like a surprise meal, it's something weird too. He ate like peanut butter with fried squid and blackberries and steak, or some very odd combination that no one could guess, right? And all the other oracles throughout the world were like, we don't know. The Oracle of Delphi exactly said it right. He's eating this, 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 and this. And so word gets back, and the king is just stunned. And from that point on, he, is sending all these giant, and Lydia was hyper wealthy. All the King Midas stories, the super rich king that wears a certain gold, is based on Croesus, because he was hyper rich and was the last major empire holding out against the Persians. So he had a bunch of money and was building lots of fortifications and hiring lots of mercenaries and doing a pretty good job, and started sending all kinds of money, like offerings to Delphi. In the end, he sent another emissary there and said, should I cross the river and attack the Persians? And the oracle says, if you cross the river, a great empire will cease to exist, will end, or be destroyed. So he crossed the river, attacked the Persians, and got wiped out, and his empire ceased to exist. And the oracle says, haha, see, we told you if you cross the river, a great empire would be destroyed. It was just yours, not theirs. But there are things that happen that were hard to explain, geographic details. So I don't have any problem with the idea that there was a real power in some of these places. There were things that happened. They were hard to describe. Diocletian would launch the last great persecution of Christians because he said the old gods aren't speaking anymore. And specifically, he said that they don't speak when the Christians are around. And so we have to get all the Christians out of the military, out of the palaces, so that the old gods will speak. So, I mean, I believe in that stuff, so I don't have any problem with it. Specifically, what was going on in Pergamon, but you had the worship of Zeus. You also had a lot of worship of emperors. Eventually, the top of the hill would be a temple to Trajan, even above the temple of Zeus. Monumental, huge, and it's still there. I mean, not completely intact, but a lot of it's intact. There was a temple of Dionysus at the theater there that, it's the steepest theater that they ever built in the Greco-Roman world. It's like it's hanging off the edge of the cliff. And at the bottom of that is the temple of Dionysus, Demeter, Asclepius, Athena, on and on and on and on and on.
So the things that stood out to me when we were there was definitely Asclepius. That theater of Pergamum looked like it was something right out of Middle Earth. And then and then of course the altar to Zeus, which is not much there. But once I got back home and started looking at pictures and looking at what it really did when it looked like before, it was mind blowing.
It's funny you said Middle Earth by that theater. I got back and told Kelly it looked like the architecture in Mordor. So I went a little darker than just Middle Earth. I was like, that is crazy, that weird theater.
Is from the darkest depths of Mordor.
Yeah. You met a girl so fair?
Yeah.
You never know what reference you're going to get around here. Monty Python, Led Zeppelin, Tolkien.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's super steep. I mean, it's like, it's dark looking too, because like aged, and it's like, I don't know how they sat there and it didn't fall. Like when I was walking in there, I was like, this is terrifying.
Yeah, no, it's really steep. You feel like you'd fall to the bottom of it. The altar of Zeus thing, we think altar, we think like the little table in front of a church. This was a monumental structure. It was enormous. And what's really, really weird is, I grew up in the very first thing I ever did with money I made on my own, this will date me, that's okay, was I lied when I was 14 and said I was 15 and got a job at a grocery store down the street from my house, was walking distance in Nashville. And I think it was my very, very first ever paycheck, which, at the $3 an hour I was making back then wasn't very much, probably, or $4. But I went to Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade on my own dime. I got paid to go watch that movie. So I grew up, in the era of Indiana Jones, right? And in those movies, the theme is that the Nazis are running all around the world trying to collect like weird occultic stuff to get magic powers to win the war, And you think like, this is totally bullcrap. And then you go to Pergamum and you're like, well, where's the altar? And you're like, oh, it's in Berlin. Why is it in Berlin? Oh, Hitler got it. Okay. So they really did go around and grab weird occultic stuff and haul it back, to Germany for whatever reason. And so
we've seen the movie, and so we know how it ends when you try.
Yeah, well, you should never open that box. And if they do, close your eyes.
I guess face.
But they really did run around doing stuff like that. So that it's not totally like, I guess that's sort of based on, I don't know exactly reality, but kind of like reality. But to this day, it's in Berlin. And what I've been heard is it's in some museum on an island that's been closed for a while. They're doing some reconstruction or something. But I mean, it's in Berlin. You can pull pictures of it, off the internet.
I'll show some.
Yeah. So it's and it's huge. Like it's big stairs that go up, and the bas relief, like the carvings on it, they look demonic, sort of like they look tortured. It's all these, I think it's the gods versus the giants, which is communicating the idea that the Greek gods fought the older beings, the chaos, to establish order, and an order is established by following this, which, obviously we would disagree with, It is interesting, though, how there's echoes of reality even in the lies. because like the Bible, the creation story talks about how the earth was without form and void, so there is a reference to like a pre-creation sort of chaos, I think, in the biblical text, and then you see that sort of picked up. Again, I think there's echoes of the truth even in the lies, maybe.
Well, and it's like it is very. I mean, I think there's definitely a central truth somewhere in those things dating back to something, but it's like the Jewish understanding of the chaos being more like the sea, but then God bringing order from that in an act where it's like I feel like all the other ancient religions, it's more like the gods, it, the the gods fought and it made something rather than
Yeah.
God creating something, and then the humans are almost always this byproduct to serve the gods, where it's like the Jewish story is God creating us and then we're
Yeah.
ruling.
And when he created us to rule the earth,
Right.
you know, as
Yeah.
opposed to, yeah, just being sort of the minions of whatever.
Yeah.
Um, or even like, in Islam where the earth is a test, basically, you know, like, yeah, there's all these different perspectives, different religions, which we're kind of like, yeah, no, that's not what we think happened. But another thing that I think is in common is that you have in a lot of pagan religions the idea that there is some like older, far off, earlier god, or creator that's out there, and that the current gods got rid of, stepped away from, or descended from him or it. So like with the Greek pantheon, you have the Olympians, but they replaced Chaos and Kronos and Gaia. So there was like an earlier thing that all emerged out of, and then they moved beyond it. Which again, that's not exactly getting at God, but it's getting at something. That there was this earlier thing where the earth came to be, and their time and order out of chaos. And then now we've got this thing. So yeah, there's something going on there. And it just sort of depends on how weird you want to get or how far you want to chase the rabbit down that hole. But I think what I've come to believe the more I study things, and this is not essential to the gospel, but I do think that maybe following Babel, God sort of delegated authority over the nations to spiritual entities and kept Israel his own. I mean, the Bible says that
Yeah.
pretty clearly. And
It's kind of
so,
a Michael Heiser take.
yeah, but I mean,
I like it. I like.
but it's not just a Michael Heiser take. Like Michael Heiser says that N.T. Wright, I think, has the same, and from a very, very different strain of Christianity and a really good um, theologian, scholar, I think, has the same take. He hates it slightly differently, but not very different than Heiser does. So, no, I think it's just clear, and the Bible just says it, and so I do think there were some things going on there, and it was weird and strange. The Asclepius stuff is super weird. If you want to talk about paganism and weird demonic thing,
Yeah.
people
So
would
that.
go
Yeah.
ahead
Go into detail on that
to
because that's.
Asclepius and what happened
I
in
mean, I think to
Asclepion.
like a modern Christian, you'd be like,
Hmm?
what they did? What did they do now?
Yeah, well, okay, so it's ancient world and you want to get healed. I mean, it just makes sense, like you've got I don't know, an earache, your legs busted, you can't have children. I mean, it could be all sorts of whatever problems, an eye problem, anything. You got a physical ailment, and so you would go to the temple of Asclepius, and Asclepion was sort of a half hospital, half temple to the god of healing, Asclepius. And you would present yourself to the priest there, and you would say, like, I don't know, my arm hurts, my leg doesn't work, whatever your deal was, your problem. And they would say, okay, here's what you need to do. You would pray to the god, please give me a vision, show me how to be healed. You would drink a concoction, probably hallucinogens, maybe some narcotics. So basically, you'd be in a drug-induced state. and then you would spend the night sleeping in an underground chamber full of snakes, because the snakes are symbolic of magic, knowledge. And if you remember, to this day, the symbol for healing is the staff with the snakes wrapped around it, which is
And that's
not the
based on that.
biblical one. In the Bible, you have the thing where Moses puts the snake on the stick, and you
Right.
have to look at it to be saved. I think what the Bible often does
To be
is it
healed.
uses similar imagery, but it's inverted. You know, it doesn't mean what it means to pagans. So pagans are like the snake, whether it's the Pythia that we already mentioned in Delphi, or whether it's this, the serpent offers healing, magic, wisdom. The Nagas in Hinduism, like there's just magic snakes all over the pagan world.
I don't
It's
like
just
snakes at
true.
all. So like I just don't understand. I couldn't if this I would not go to the doctor if this is what I had to do. They're
If
like,
you
"All
had,
right, drink the juice and get in the pit of snakes." And I'm like, "It's fine. I'll keep the headache. It's
I'm
fine."
feeling better.
My arm's better. I know it's not working, but I just forget about it.
Good, doc. But yeah, so then you would go in this place, in your drug induced state. You basically spend sleep for the night at the Asclepion in Pergamon. They also had these like weird, like little vent holes where the priest could walk around up above and like say little like quote unquote blessings down to the people below who were having their, I don't know, event or whatever. So it was just all kinds of weird stuff going on. In the morning, you'd wake up, crawl out from amongst the snakes, and go tell the priest what you saw. He would interpret your vision for you and tell you how to be healed. And clearly, you had a combination of mysticism and practicality there. I'm sure a lot of what was going on was the Asclepian, the priests who were doctors, if you would. Also, you had a certain level of practical health knowledge. And
Yeah.
I'm sure sometimes they were like, "Oh, you should da 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 da," and the God has revealed, and really it was
It makes
just,
it as you when you say it that way, it makes me think that they were like, "Yeah, have them go do the thing, and get in there with the snakes." And they come out and they're like, "What'd you say?" They're like, "I saw a dragon on a mountain, and then I went and I was in a cloud." And they're like, oh, "Okay, that means you're supposed to drink this potion. Okay, now it'll be 75, however much
yeah,
coins."
yeah. That means take some aspirin, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, and sometimes it'd be practical, and I think sometimes it would be, something more of a spiritual nature.
yeah.
And then if you were healed, you're supposed to come back, and you see this, by the way. Corinth also had an Asclepion, and they have all these carvings of body parts. So whatever body part you got healed, you could come back and present a sort of terracotta version of it. So you go in this one, and, and it's pretty weird, pretty bizarre. I mean, you've got, anyway, all the
Yeah,
body
we know what
parts.
it's like over there. We know we
Yeah,
know what it's like.
yeah. If you go to the little part of the museum in Corinth, and again, there's just carvings of all the body parts.
They like to focus on certain ones more than others, is
Yeah,
what
if like I say, if you don't want your kids to see whatever kind of stuff, that's definitely a room to.
well, it's what we would call private parts.
Yeah, yeah, in detail. So anyway, but you would do that, and okay, so here's me, and I'm just whatever my perspective on it. If you
Hmm.
believe in a spiritual world, and I certainly do, and you believe that there are demons, there are spiritual powers that would like to uh see your destruction and use you for their ends, then I mean, praying to hear from one of them, taking hallucinogens, locking yourself in an underground chamber with the snakes overnight. I mean, you'd be opening yourself up to something. So that seems pretty demonic to me. And then you add to all of that imperial cult. You have to worship the emperor. You have to worship the state. And I think you just had a very, very toxic mix of a lot of really dark things going on in Pergamon. And when you have a a broader culture that's pushing you really, really hard to participate in these things, Worship Zeus or you're bad. Worship Trajan or you're bad. Go to the Asclepion and drink the potion and ask the god to tell you how to heal that. And then you have a broader culture that when you refuse to do those things, you're making the gods angry. You're bringing their ire. The whatever problems we have in the next weeks or months, it's your fault. There's all kinds of, it's a lot of pressure. And so that's why Jesus makes this statement where he says to them, you live where Satan's throne is. And he says, and you're holding on to my name, do not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness or servant, who was killed among you where Satan lives. We don't know very much about Antipas. As a matter of fact, that's the only sentence in the whole Bible about him. So there's nothing biblical. Church fathers, there's a little bit. Basically, the church fathers tell us that he was the bishop of the city. So he was the head lead pastor in Pergamon, and that he was martyred by being placed inside of a brazen bull made of bronze, and you'd be placed inside of it, and they put a fire underneath it, so it'd be cooked in an oven. That's really all we're told, though. We don't really know anything other than that. But it does lead me to think this, which is that there is a reality that we do not all serve Christ in the same context. Okay? I mean, the reality of my life is that I was born in Alabama, lived most of my childhood in Tennessee until I was 23, finished college, university. No one throws Christians inside of brazen bulls in the Southeast. The reality is that some of us are called to serve in hard places. And the Lord wants to have witnesses in those places as well as the, frankly, easier places. And for those of us that are called to serve him in difficult places, and difficult places also could just, maybe it's a job. You have a job and your boss and people around you are just super critical of Christianity, or, maybe you're just in a place where Christianity is kind of ridiculed, disrespected. I mean, there can be all sorts of levels of this, right? But where you're called to be faithful to Christ in a place dominated by Satan. And what Jesus says is, I see your faithfulness when you serve me in a hard place, in a hard situation, and you're still faithful. And to me, that's hyper encouraging, because while I've never faced what Antipas faced, no one ever told me you worship the emperor or we're going to throw you in this oven. Well, that's never happened to me. There have been times in my life when it was easier to keep my mouth shut than to speak for Christ. I think our whole culture does that in a lot of ways, encourages us to be quiet. And there are times to speak, And so I relate to that. It is encouraging to hear Jesus say, I see it. But he also gives them a warning. So to these people that are serving this very difficult place where it's so hard, and I always think about Antipas, like I got to think, if you're Antipas and you've been serving as the bishop of Pergamon, you've been the lead Christian there, and it's been tough, and you've been getting persecuted, and one day they haul you out of your house, and they're like, deny Christ, or we're going to kill you today, and we're going to torture kill you by throwing you in a bowl and heating it up. That's rough. Nobody wants to go that way. But the only thing I know for sure about Antipas is that Jesus thought so much of him that from the throne room of heaven, he spoke to John and dictated this and referred to him as my faithful servant. So if the only thing ever written about you is Jesus himself saying you were his faithful servant, and he made sure it got into the Bible forever, like, that's pretty good. And so to me, I guess what I see is, well, the reward for serving in hard places is worth it. As difficult as that is, the Lord sees and he rewards, and we have to trust that. And that's kind of what the passage goes on to say. So he tells them, first off, he says, I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold the teachings of Balaam, that's a reference to the Old Testament who taught Balak to place a stumbling block in front of the Israelites. Basically, here's what happened in that story. The Jews were on their way to the Holy Land. The Moabites wanted to stop them. So you had all these sort of kingdoms that were on the other side of the Jordan, right? Ammon, Moab, Edom, and there's 2 million Israelites. So you got to have a really big army to try to stop that. It's not kind of working for anybody. And so what the Moabites figure out is, well, or decide is, well, we can't beat them. Let's corrupt them. And so there's this whole story where it's like, well, to get God to get mad at them, and that'll corrupt them, and maybe we can stop them that way. Is the Moabite women go into the Israelite camp and basically offer themselves to the Israelite men sexually. And they're trying to get the Israelite men to compromise their sexual morality and go with these women and worship Baal. So it's basically like the women of Moab are trying to lure, again, using sexuality, the Israelite men into corrupting themselves, both in their morality and in their worship, right? And so the warning, that the concept there is that you are powerful. And I think that the imagery that's used in Revelation chapter 1, where he talks about the stars and all that kind of stuff, sort of Roman symbol of authority. Jesus says that it symbolizes the church, but it's also a symbol of authority, is that Jesus is saying that you're more powerful than you know. You have a lot of authority, and the enemy can't stop you, but he can corrupt you if you let him. And you have to be concerned with this. And so he uses that analogy from the Old Testament, and then he hones it in specifically. So it was a stumbling block placed in front of Israel, and he says to eat meat sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual morality. Okay, so now he's pivoting to what maybe the Christians in the first century being offered to do. It's like, listen, and he says also, and he goes on and he says, in the same way, you also have those who hold the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Therefore repent. Okay, so what I believe, and I think what most scholars are going to say, is that this is what was going on. In the face of all that pressure, there were people coming along who were saying, like, it's actually okay if you go along to get along a little bit. So if there's like one of these love festivals at the temple and your friend invites you, do you want to go to the temple of Dionysus with me and, have this feast thing where everybody kind of gets drunk and it's a little bit of a sexual orgy kind of thing going on? But, it's just like a little one-off to show people you don't hate them, and you want to go. And people were teaching like, well, you can compromise a little bit every once in a while, just kind of to make the peace. If the governor comes along and says, you got to quick, throw a little offering to Domitian or whoever or Augustus or whatever, what's it hurt to kill a chicken or throw a coin in the plate or whatever? That little thing buys you a whole lot of peace. And I think that's what's going on, is that there are people who are saying that a little compromise here and there to get along, even if it's a little bit sinful, you got Temple of Aphrodite, and what they're doing down there is definitely, what they're doing for worship is probably not approved of by the Bible, but it's just what kind of has to happen. It's just normal for here, And it's that kind of sort of cultural compromise, I think, that Jesus is saying, no, do not do this. And I do think that is something we can learn from, that there's this rational part of you that's like, that's just a little thing. It's just a one-off. And Jesus is like, no, that's not true. Because we're called to worship him, which means that we're called to act as if he is the most important thing in the universe. So you've got the first thing where he says, I see where you're serving in a really hard place. And then he gives them this sort of warning / encouragement, like, even so, don't compromise, with that culture, that evil culture. And then here at the end, I really kind of like what he says. It's a little bit cryptic, so I think that's sort of the last thing that we'll hit on is this thing about a white stone. So anyone who has ears, listen to what the Spirit says to the churches. I will give the victors some of the hidden manna. And I will also, by the way, there's lots of speech about victors, about winning, that we're the winners. You're going to win. I will also give to him a white stone. Now on this stone, a new name is inscribed that no one knows except the one who receives it. And the question is, what's this white stone thing? And there's three explanations, and I think that they all have merit. And it probably kind of means all of it. If you ever heard the term like being blackballed, that's in reference to old fraternities, secret societies, where if you're voting on does someone get in or not, if you put a white marble in the bucket, you're voting for them. You put a black ball or marble in the bucket, you're voting against. Maybe it takes 90% or 75% for to get you in the club, and so if somebody throws one of those black markers in, you're not in. So part of it is it's a marker of acceptance. Another implication is that white stones were given to those who have been found innocent in court cases, with maybe some sort of transcription on them, innocent of da-da-da-da. But there's a white stone that is a marker of innocence, of being found not guilty, which clearly that makes sense. But my favorite one is this, that if you go back to the ancient world and you were invited to a big gala event, or even if you just wanted to go to the theater possibly, and you needed some sort of ticket, the mass production of paper wasn't a thing yet. So you weren't getting a ticket as we know it. The best example I could give you of that is going to the Colosseum in Rome. If you ever get a chance to go to Rome or go to the Colosseum, what you'll see is that every arch has a Roman numeral above it. I forget how many arches there are, maybe 1 through 23 or something like that. They kind of wrap around. And if you wanted to go to the gladiatorial games, you went to the market across the street, and there you would be given a ticket. And the ticket wasn't a ticket like we have. It was a terracotta disc with two numbers on it. One was the gate you were to enter, and the other was your seat number. Basically how it worked was the Romans were a hyper-classed, civilization. And so the lower numbers were for the higher classes. So the emperor and his entourage went in gate 1. You might be senators in gate 2, and, you kind of go on down from there. Soldiers are in about gate 7 or 8 or so. And, it kind of gets worse as you go along. But they still have these discs, some of them, they found them. It's not just conjecture. But that's just for something that was happening all the time, right? So they just made these terracotta discs, they reused them, you turned them in, and, they could use it again for the next one. For a big deal, like the inauguration of an emperor, well, that's a one-time thing, and it's got to be fancy. In the Roman world, where the emperor was a god, being in that elite company invited to something like that, that's something you can be like, hey, by the way, I hang out with, Nero, leave me alone, or I hang out with, Augustus or whoever. That's kind of a big deal, And so they would inscribe your invitation onto a white stone with your name. It was formally done. So Jamison Creel, you're invited to the inaugural ball for Claudius as the new emperor of Rome. And you would present that to get in, but then you would also keep it as a marker, of status, because not everybody gets invited to something like that. And I think that's most likely what it's, I think it's a reference to all those things. But the idea that was, it's something really fancy, that you would have a carved inscription stating that you were one of the people invited to attend it, was there. And this mention of a name will be inscribed that no one knows except the one who receives it. I think that's a reference to intimacy, that Jesus knows us very personally and privately. And, because with people that super closely, Like with my kids, I may have a nickname for them or a pet name that no one else uses. Or, it could be between a couple, but between people that are super close, you have that sometimes. And so the point is, like, if Jesus knows you well enough that there's a thing that just he calls you, and that that's what's on that stone, then not only are you invited to his party, you're invited to enter where he is, but you're close to him. And I think at the end of it all, that's what it's about. It's saying that, yeah, you serve in a tough place, but hang in, don't compromise. And there's a major reward. You're going to be invited into private, intimate relationship with Christ, forever. And that's worth it. That's going to be worth what you pay up front for it.
Cool. Yeah, that definitely paints the picture. I love getting that context, having gone to Pergamon, but also like kind of processing the end there. I can really like visualize that like name with the stone, and it makes sense in the culture. It's like you said, it's like a status symbol in a way. And it's just like, hey, just hold fast, and I will give you your status. So I think that's a good picture of things. Well, that's going to be it for this one, right? So we did Pergamum.
Yeah. On to Thyatira, or Thyatira, I think they call it around here.
Is that what they call it there?
I think so.
Greece?
Yeah.
Okay.
I hear different things, but
Thyatira.
yeah, on to there next, where we get to talk about the woman Jezebel. The Jezebel spirit. We're going to get real.
We spent some time on Jezebel in the Old Testament when we did our prophet series.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go revisit.
Can't be compromised with that Jezebel spirit.
That's right. Well, I look forward to that. Awesome. Well, we'll wrap this one up. But as always, if you're enjoying this and you want to go check more content out like this, head over to thelandofthebible.com. Check out our studies where we travel all around to biblical sites and explore them firsthand. And then Jamison teaches the Bible there on site. You get to hear it in context. And, obviously check us out anywhere the podcast is streaming, and like and subscribe on YouTube, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. If you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandofthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.